Hi, I'm Kelly, and I want to share my Home Alone horror story with you. It happened about a year ago. My mom is a single mother. She's been so ever since we lost dad to a car accident. So now it's just the three of us, my mom, my little brother Dave, and I. Mom is a nurse, though most of the time she works during the day and evenings. She is home except if there is an emergency at the hospital. One day, I experienced the scariest situation of my life. At least so far, that has been the scariest thing to ever happen to me. One day, after closing from swimming class, Dave and I got home, ate dinner, and it was around 7:30 p.m. when Mom got a call informing about an emergency at the hospital, and that she needed to rush down there. So, I had to stay home with my brother at night until Mom got back. It wasn't a big deal after all. Mom shouldn't be gone for long, I thought. Mom had given us a strict warning not to go out or open the door to anyone except her. She left for the hospital, and I was with my brother in the sitting room watching cartoons. I'm not really a fan of cartoons, so I changed the channel. Dave wasn't happy with it, so he left and sat by the window watching the rain. It was raining heavily. Even the thunderclaps were loud enough to be heard through the shut doors and windows. Suddenly, I noticed Dave was talking to someone outside. I walked to him and saw that he was looking at a man who was in the rain trying to talk to Dave. I opened the window so I could hear what he was saying. He asked us to let him in because of the heavy rain. Dave wanted to help him, but my mom's warnings were ringing in my ears. So I refused. I apologized to the man that I couldn't be of any help and that he should find a place somewhere else. He then walked closer to us and I shut the window with fear and angst both. He looked so rough. I didn't have a good feeling about him. I took Dave and walked back to the TV and turned it back on to the cartoon channel. I didn't want Dave to feel bad, so I sat close to him while we watched the TV together. A few minutes later, we heard a loud sound of banging on the door and a voice outside. It was the same man we met at the window. Both of us were shocked and scared by this. We did not know what to do. Suddenly, he broke the glass of the window and tried to come in. Dave started screaming for help, but the rain was so heavy and the thunder so loud that none of our neighbors could hear him. He then came in through the window and attempted to grab me. I speedily ran up the stairs and was heading towards the attic. Dave was running just behind me. While we ran up the stairs in fear, he tried to follow us, but he tripped and fell. When he was trying to get up, Dave suddenly took Dad's baseball bat, which we always keep by the corner of the stairs, and hit the bat on the man's head. We both ran into the attic. That brave action by Dave really brought us some time to action out. We could have called the police, but the phone was downstairs in the sitting room, and we were stuck in the attic. We knew once the stranger regained himself from the hit, he was gonna come upstairs, and we didn't want to find out what was gonna happen next. As we were planning what to do next, he came up the attic. At that point, I don't know where I get the morale from nor the strength, but I grabbed Dave and jumped out of the attic window. Although jumping out of the attic window was gonna lead us on a large heap of sand just at the backyard of the house, we still jumped out. We ran to the neighboring compound and informed the family there about the situation. They called the police and also came to our house to check. However, by that time, he was gone. The neighbors decided to stay with us till either our mom or the police arrived. About 5 minutes later, the police came. They questioned us to get information about the man. Dave and I were still scared, and not long after, Mom came from the hospital. We told her everything, and she was glad we were safe. Since that day, no matter the emergency, Mom either keeps us at the neighbor's place or she takes us along with her to work. She never left us home alone again. This was my scary Home Alone horror story. Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you like the story, do subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon.
It was Halloween party, but unlike any other Halloween, this was one to remember for my town because it ended up being cancelled by the police for security reasons. A horrible event took place, and here is how it all began. It was a very big party. Everyone had decided to celebrate Halloween together, and a lot of people were dressed up in scary costumes. But everything was for fun. There were lots of drinks and food and music. There was a bonfire at the open area of the town near the woods. Mary, Scott and Tony were three good friends. Although Mary and Scott were kind of together in a relationship, Tony wasn't from the same town as Mary and Scott, but he had decided to celebrate the festival with his friends, as there was to be a drinking competition among the guys in the town by 12 midnight. This made Scott and Tony excited. They were hanging around, waiting for midnight. Beverly and her dad, who was the town's mayor, had promised free tequila for everyone, and tequila happened to be Tony's favorite. As Scott and Tony approached the van where free tequila was to be served, they found out it was locked. As they looked around, they spotted the mayor and asked him when will the free tequila be served. He told them the drinks should have been already served by now, and that the van keys are with his daughter, Beverly. He told them to go find her and also help in serving the drinks. Scott and Tony searched for Beverly, hoping she wouldn't be far because the van was parked close to the party and everyone was around the bonfire. But Beverly was nowhere to be found. Scott went to Liz, one of Beverly's close friends, and asked her if she knew where Beverly was. Liz told Scott that Beverly went with a little girl to the woods, probably to help her with something, and that she would be back soon. The boys thanked Liz and decided to wait for Beverly and started discussing about how fun the party was. Scott told Tony, "I have a girl for you, and I'm sure you will like her." After telling him about her, they decided to go talk to her while they waited for Beverly. They went to Mary, who was supposed to be with Emily, the girl Scott was talking about. But Mary told them that Emily went with a little girl to the woods, probably to help her with something, and that she would be back soon. Now that was shocking. Or was that a coincidence? Mary just told them the same story that they heard from Liz. Now they both decided to go get the two girls from the woods, as they sensed something fishy. While on their way to the woods, they bumped into Miss Laura, their high school teacher. Scott asked her why she was heading to the woods. She told them that a little girl came to ask for her help, that her brother's leg was stuck under a log of wood. Scott and Tony looked at each other, and they knew something dangerous was going on. They explained to her what they had heard from Liz and Mary and asked her to call the police while they go and find out what was going on. They suddenly looked towards the woods and saw a little girl, about the age of 10. Tony called her, but she quickly ran into the woods. They started to think, why would a little girl run into the woods? Dark woods, for that matter. The guys decided to run after her. They heard a scream coming from deep in the woods. They stopped and hid behind a big tree. They both peeked from behind the tree and were stunned at their sight. They saw bodies on the ground. Bodies of two girls laying dead with their heads cut off. What was most shocking was that there were a group of people wearing black robes, standing around the bodies, forming a circle and holding a knife each. Beverly and one other girl were tied down, and from the looks of it, it seemed they were about to be slaughtered because there were already bodies of the two girls on the floor with their heads cut off and their blood in a big bowl. It looked like a ritual of some sort of human sacrifice. Scott picked up a stone and threw it hard at one of the worshippers in the road. The rest of them looked at Scott and Tony and began to chase them. Scott and Tony ran in fear towards the same direction, but as the men got closer, they accidentally split up. While Tony was running so fast, Scott had lost the strength to continue. He tripped and fell. The men surrounded him and tried to stab him. Fortunately, Tony rushed into one of them, pushing them to the ground. hitting the other with heavy punches to the forehead. But while at it, he didn't realize one of those men was behind him and he got stabbed. Now Tony was on the ground, bleeding, and Scott seemed to have hurt his ankle. Both the boys were surrounded with those scary men with nowhere to run. Then suddenly, they heard a loud voice saying, "Freeze! Put your hands up in the air! Drop the knife!" At last, it was the police. Miss Laura had called them. The men in the robe were arrested, and one of those who tried to escape got shot. As for Beverly and the other girl, who were still alive, they were rescued. One of the bodies on the floor was identified as Emily, the girl Scott was telling Tony about. She was dead. The bodies were packed away in body bags, and the Halloween party was canceled that night. While Scott had to console Mary for the loss of her friend, they waited in the hospital, hoping Tony survived the treatment from the knife stab. It was a regular day at the police station. I was busy on a case, and I was going through the details. At that moment, a young girl, aged maybe around 22, 23 years old, walked into the station. I was the in charge of the station, so she directly walked up to my desk and asked if I could help her. A beautiful lady, long hair, pretty face. She seemed to belong from a nice and rich family. I asked her to sit down and asked her what was the matter.
"Sir, I'm a murderer."
She was trembling as she said this. She was there to surrender herself. "Who did you kill?" I asked her after taking a long pause, because her first sentence was not really expected.
"I have killed 3 people."
I was really surprised to hear that. A girl so pretty could kill 3 people and was also confessing it in front of the police. The whole scenario was a bit unusual for me.
"I've killed my gardener, my driver, and
She paused a bit and started to sob.
my mother."
She started crying hard. I gave her some water to drink. She had a few sips, and when she controlled her emotions, she continued to talk.
"Please, I beg you, please arrest me, otherwise I'll kill someone else also."
Why did you kill them? And why would you kill others, ma'am? What's your name?
"Julie."
She was still sobbing. Miss Julie, why did you kill them?
"I don't know, it just happened. And after I killed them, I wondered why did I kill them."
Ma'am, I'm seriously not getting this. And I can't arrest you without any complaint or without seeing the body of the dead people you're talking about. She looked very tense to me. So I continued. Can you tell me where are the bodies?
"I dug them in my garden."
She didn't seem fake, but I was finding it difficult to believe what she was saying. I wanted to know the truth. I decided to go to her house. Took 2 constables along with me. When we reached her house, she took us to her garden and told us the places where the bodies of the gardener and driver were dug. I commanded the constables to dig out the bodies. Where is the body of your mother? I asked the girl.
"Inside the house. I killed her and immediately came running to the police station."
I started to follow Julie. It was a big house with several rooms. She really was from a wealthy family. She took me inside the house and then stopped in front of a dark room.
"Inside! My mother is lying inside!"
She said this and started to cry again. I slowly started to move inside the room. The room was so dark, and it was difficult to see anything. It was weird why there was no light in there, whereas the rest of the house was lit. I had 1 torch with me, so I decided to turn that on. I searched the whole room, but the room was empty. Then I saw a closed door, and it seemed as if there was another room behind it. I opened that room, and I was shocked to see that there were 3 bodies lying inside that room. 2 men, Maybe Julie's gardener and the driver, and one old lady. Maybe her mother. I was wondering why Julie told me that the bodies of the gardener and driver were out there in the garden. Ah! Someone hit me hard on my head from behind. I turned around. I was terrified to see Julie standing with a bat in her hand that was covered with my blood. Why? I asked her in a trembling voice. She came closer to me and hit me again to make me fall on the ground. With that, I became unconscious. My vision turned blurry. She bent down and with a grin on her face said,
Because it's fun.
She took my gun and rushed outside. I heard 2 shots fired, and I went unconscious after that. After some time, I gained consciousness and slowly opened my eyes. I saw that my hands and legs were tied up. I looked around and saw the bodies of the gardener, driver, and Julie's mother on one side. On the other side of me were the bodies of my 2 constables, who Julie must have fired the gunshots on. I heard a humming sound from the corner of the room. I looked from where the sound was coming. I saw Julie there, coldly sitting in front of a mirror, combing her hair and humming the song. The Stranger Next Door. Gwen was a young, innocent girl who recently turned 21. She moved into her own house, even though her parents didn't want her to. Her parents were old, and her brother was too young. They wanted her to live with them, but she didn't want to listen to them. She'd rented a flat at a street around 10 blocks away from her parents' house. Because she was too young and moving in alone, she had to get some paperwork and formalities done. At the police station, the police warned her not to go there as there was something weird about that place and that many people who had been living there had gone missing. Gwen had already paid the rent for that house, and she didn't believe in all these things either. She ignored what the police said and drove herself to 5th Lewis Street, the street where she had rented her new house. At first, she was excited. She was thrilled. But when she reached there, she was confused. There were only 2 houses there. One of them was her house, and the other one was an old, spooky-looking house named as Black House. While she was getting out of the car, she heard a groaning sound from the Black House. She ignored it for that moment and went towards her house. When she entered her house, it was dusty, covered with spiderwebs, completely a mess. She spent almost 5 hours cleaning the house. She was so busy cleaning that she didn't even realize it was midnight. When she did, she ordered in dinner, ate, and headed upstairs to go to sleep. A few hours later, at around 3 o'clock, Gwen woke up to some weird groaning noises from the neighboring house. She looked out of the window and saw a middle-aged, shabbily dressed man punching on the wall. He seemed drunk by his behavior. No wonder nobody lives here, she thought to herself while staring at the man and the Black House. The next morning, Gwen woke up to a banging on her door. She quickly got out of her bed and answered the door. She looked around, but there wasn't anybody there. While taking a step forward, she felt something at her feet. She looked down. It was a package. She took it inside and opened it. She was surprised at what she saw. Inside the package was a painting of the Black House with a big X on it. She thought it must be her neighbor's parcel that came to her address by mistake. She found the painting to be amazing, but thought that the artist was crazy to ruin it with a strike-off on it. She decided to go to the Black House and hand over the painting to her neighbor. When she knocked on the door, there was no answer for some time. "Hello?" she said, knocking at the door again. Finally, a man in a hospital gown, with his face all bandaged up, opened the door. "What do you want, kid?" he asked. Here, I think your mail came to my address by mistake," Gwen replied as she gave him the painting. He grabbed the painting from Gwen's hand and slammed the door on her face. Gwen thought it was no big deal as he seemed drunk. Gwen went back home, freshened up, and grabbed her car keys and purse to shop for some groceries from a store up the street. While she was getting into her car, she saw her neighbor staring at her through his window. Gwen got into her car and drove off to the store. When she got there was nobody there. She ignored everything else, picked what she wanted, and while she was shopping, she felt as if she was being watched. She looked around, but there was no one in the store except for the cashier at the billing counter. She billed her groceries and drove back home. When she reached home, she dropped the bag of groceries on the table and laid down on the sofa, surfing through her phone. An hour later, she kept her phone on charge and headed out to see if her neighbor was okay. She couldn't see him anywhere, so she headed towards the table to sort out the groceries. While doing so, she again felt as if she was being watched. She felt something wave off her hair. She panicked, but looked around and saw nothing. She spent the day setting up and sorting out the house and headed towards the bed after a nice dinner. The next day, Gwen woke up to the sound of the shower running. She went to the bathroom and turned off the shower and went to make some coffee. She was a little puzzled. She wasn't sure what or who turned on the shower, but while she was making coffee, she felt that there was somebody watching her. She then heard loud noises from the neighboring house. She went on to look, and this time, he was punching and banging the wall. The lights started to flicker, and the noises went on increasing. She decided it's time to call the police and report the incident, but there was no connection. What? But I had internet just yesterday, Gwen thought to herself. In a minute, she looked back at the black house, and this time, she saw no one there. The noise stopped, and the lights went off. At that moment, she felt someone stroke her hair. When she turned around, it was the same man who lived in the black house. She freaked out. A minute ago, he was in his house, punching the wall, and now he was in her house trying to touch her. "I'm here to take you away to a place where nobody will find you." Gwen pushed him away, grabbed her car keys, and drove off from there. She went straight to her parents' place. Her mom opened the door, and she was surprised to see her as they didn't want her to move out, but she still did, going against what they wanted. Gwen told them someone was stalking her, but they thought she was playing around. They asked her to get out from there, because they were still angry with what she'd done. Gwen had no option but to leave from there. She then decided to go to the police station and report the incident. When the police asked her about her address and the house next to it, they were stunned and told her that nobody has been living there since years. Gwen was terrified on hearing this. She has been watching the man in the black house for about a week now. How was that possible? But she was so sure to have seen him there creating all that chaos because of past instances of people going missing from that house that Gwen had rented. The police decided to go and check the place out. The door of the black house was locked, and the house was all dusty and weary, as if it was abandoned for years. The police officers got in through a broken window and checked the whole house, but there was no sign of anyone living there. Gwen was shocked and couldn't believe her eyes. Then she took the cops to her house, 'cause that's where the guy was the last time she saw him. The house was empty. Gwen had to be safe. The police asked her to pack her stuff and leave from there as fast as possible. After saying this, they left her house. Gwen was not in a position to think about where she would go next. Her parents' house, or rent another house, or what? Started packing her stuff quickly. When she was at the dressing table picking her stuff, she felt thirsty. She grabbed a bottle of water that was on the table and stood there sipping on it. At that moment, she felt a hand stroke on her head. She looked into the mirror. In front of her, it was the same man staring at her into the mirror from behind her. He stooped towards her shoulder and with an evil grin on his face, whispered in her ear, "Trying to get away, huh?" When you think of video games and mobile games, horror is the last thing that might come to your mind. Hi, I'm Nick, and today I'm going to share the terrifying experience me and my friends faced while playing Among Us. We're 4 friends: Patrick, Gordon, Harry, and myself. We've been together since childhood, and we are best of friends. We attended school together, play together, and hang out together in the evenings after school. My friends and I are very fond of video games and mobile games. Every time a new game is launched, either of us comes to know about it and tells the others. Then we all get together and play that game together. One afternoon, on our way back home from school, Patrick told us about a game that he got to know from the internet. It was called Among Us. It seemed interesting. When we got home, we installed the game in our computers and started playing it that evening itself. The game could be played either with unknown players, active at a given time, or privately with friends by using a secret code. I created a game for us and shared the private code on our chat group. Patrick, Gordon, and Harry joined in through that code. While we were just about to start playing, we saw a new entrant in the game by the name Connor. Now that was strange. Only the 4 of us knew the passcode to the game we were about to play. We thought it must be a glitch and discussed on our chat group that we wanted to play by ourselves. We decided to leave the game and create a new game. I shared a new secret code on the chat group. When everyone had joined and the game was about to start, there was a notification that it was Connor again who joined the game. We found it so irritating and wanted him to leave. At that moment, Patrick came up with an idea on our chat group. He asked us to start playing and remove Connor out of the game in the first round itself by voting him out as an imposter. We thought that was a great idea and we started to play. The first round of the game started and now it was time for the vote out. There's a section to discuss the voting in the game. We started to chat there. Gordon said that Connor must be the imposter according to me. Harry said yes, and I felt the same. To that, Connor said, "I'm not the imposter. Believe me, I am not." Patrick and I countered him and said, "No, we are sure it's you. Your actions were suspicious." Connor understood that we are purposely trying to vote him out of the game. He kept on saying he wasn't the one, and we started mocking him and laughing at him in the chat. When the discussion time was almost over, Connor said to all of us, "You all will regret this. This is a mistake you're making. You will pay for it." We made fun of him in the chat and Harry said, "We will see. Now you can get lost from here." We voted him out and continued playing. "That was fun," said Gordon in the chat group. After an hour or so, we were done playing and it was dinner time. We said bye to each other and decided to meet in school the next day. We met the next day in school, but Harry hadn't come. He was late. He came in during the lunch break with a very confused look on his face. He told us that after the game last night, he got a friend request from an unknown person named Connor Woodley. He asked us if he could be the same Connor whom we kicked out from the game we played. Gordon replied, "That's not possible. He doesn't know us. How will he find us then? I think it's just a coincidence." Patrick added, "Yeah, Gordon is right. There can be so many people by the same name Connor, so don't worry, it's just a coincidence." To which Harry said, "Maybe you're all right," and we attended the second half of the school. While we were returning home from school, Harry received a message on his phone from an unknown number. It was a picture of him attending class that day with a message that read, "You will pay for it." On seeing that message, we all were so horrified. At that moment, we realized that it was the same Connor from the game Among Us. How could he get Harry's number? Patrick said, I told Harry not to worry and told him that we will come over to his place that night and be with him. We went home and decided to meet at Harry's house in an hour. I came home, freshened up, and told my parents I would be staying at Harry's that night. After I had dinner with my parents, while I was packing my stuff in a bag, my phone beeped. It was a message from the same unknown number with a picture of me having dinner. Below, it was the same message that Harry had received. You will pay for it. I was shocked. I was terrified. I quickly called up Gordon and Patrick and asked them to hurry up. In a few minutes, we all were at Harry's place. Patrick asked me what was the matter and why did I look so worried. I showed him the message I received on the phone and they were shocked too. We had no idea what was going on and how did this Connor guy get our phone numbers. We sat there thinking, trying to figure out things. We looked into the game and checked for any clue, but there was nothing. After a while, there was a loud banging on the door. We looked at each other and thought, oh God, what do we do now? We found the courage and decided to open the door. When we opened the door, we saw a man wearing a hoodie running outside the veranda. We found a note on the door which read, I had told you, you will regret it. You all will pay for it. We quickly shut the door and ran to Harry's bedroom. We were so scared. At that moment, somebody threw a big stone through the window, breaking the window glass into pieces. I then decided it was too much and it was time to call the police. I took my phone and dialed 911. They asked for our address and reached Harry's house in a few minutes. We narrated the whole incident to them and they started to investigate. After a few days, we got to know that it was a boy from our school who was trying to scare us by using a fake name, Connor. He was older to us and he didn't have any friends. People thought he was a creep and stayed away from him. Now we know why people think that way about him. However, till this day, it's not known as to how did he get the private codes through which we were playing Among Us.
It was Christmas Eve. An 11-year-old French girl named Tessie was decorating the Christmas tree. She lived with her mother in a small apartment in the suburbs of Paris. Her mother worked as a nurse at a local hospital. Late that evening, Tessie's mother called to say that she would not be home until late that night. Tessie continued to decorate the Christmas tree with all of the lovely things her mother had bought her from the shop. She draped some multicolored Christmas lights around the tree and hung beautiful ornaments on the branches. After placing the angel on top of the Christmas tree, she had finally finished decorating and sat down to relax and watch TV. Even though she was all alone in the 6th-floor apartment up the building around the corner of the street, Tessie felt safe as she gazed out of the window across the lights of the Parisian skyline. From her window, she could see the Eiffel Tower and the Champs-de-Mars. Most of the other tenants in the building had gone home to celebrate Christmas Eve with their relatives in the countryside. The apartment building was almost deserted. Tessie was growing bored, waiting for her mom to return. Suddenly, she thought she heard a scratching noise at the front door. She turned down the television and listened carefully. There was an eerie silence. Curious, she slowly approached the door and looked through the peephole. To her surprise, she saw a man standing outside, dressed in a red suit with a fluffy white trim. He was large and fat with a dirty gray beard and wore a red hat on his head. He almost looked like Santa Claus. He knocked at the door loudly. Nervous and concerned, Tessie asked through the door, "Who's there?" "It's Santa Claus," the man replied. "Let me in. I am cold and tired, and I'm hungry too." On hearing this, a chill went down Tessie's spine. She was no dummy. She knew that whoever this creepy man was, he was not Santa Claus for sure. "My mother isn't home right now," she said, her voice shaking. "Please leave." Peering through the peephole, Tessie watched as the man's eyes filled with anger and his face twisted into a grimace of hate. He began knocking at the door even harder and rattling the doorknob. "It's Santa Claus, Tessie," he growled. "Have you laid out some milk and cookies for me, Tessie? You know how much Santa loves milk and cookies." The young girl had a sinking feeling in the pit of her stomach. How did he know her name? The man then began kicking and pounding at the door. She peeked out again and saw him reach into his coat pocket and pull out a switchblade. He shoved the knife into the keyhole and tried to pry it open. Tessie was terrified. She didn't know what to do. "If you don't go away, I will call the police," she shouted. All of a sudden, the knocking stopped. Tessie stood perfectly still, afraid to even move. Minutes passed, and there was no noise. She started to think that the man may have been scared and walked away because of her threat. She slowly approached the door and looked through the peephole to see if the man was really gone. The hallway seemed to be empty. Suddenly, she saw the man running down the hallway with an axe in his hand. Tessie screamed and ran to the closet in a panic. She crouched down and hid behind a coat as tears of fright rolled down her cheeks. She heard the boom, boom, boom as the man tried to smash down her front door. There was a mighty crack as the door gave way and the man came crashing down through the splintered wood. Laughing to himself, he called out, "Tessie, my pretty, where are you, Tessie? Don't be afraid. We'll have ourselves some fun tonight. Where are you hiding?" The crazed intruder walked around the house, searching for the frightened little girl. Tessie curled up in the closet, trembling with fear. She dreaded to think what he planned to do with her. Suddenly, the handle of the closet moved up and down. And then the door began shaking, and she heard the man's voice laughing. "Tessie, I know you're in there," he said. "Open up for Santa. Open up before I open you up." The man swung his axe and struck the closet door with a huge loud bang, tearing into the flimsy wood. Tessie screamed and began crying bitterly. She grabbed a wired coat hanger and twisted it into a point. She waited, her eyes wide open, and her hands were trembling. There was another loud crash, and the closet doors gave way in a hail of splinters. The horrible man broke open the doors off their hinges and thrust his head in between the coats. He was laughing and drooling like a madman as his huge, gnarled hands grabbed the horrified girl. Tessie held up the pointed end of the coat hanger and bravely thrust it into the bad man's face. It went straight into his eye. "No! No! No!" He recoiled in pain, screaming with rage as blood flowed down his cheek. He ripped the wire out of his eye socket and grabbed Tessie by the hair, and then he dragged her, kicking and screaming out of the closet. The man pushed Tessie to the ground and held her tightly by the neck, leaning over her. Blood spilled out of his eye, splattering all over her face. His mouth twisted into a grotesque smile, and he whispered in her ear, "Tonight you will be privileged, my lovely Tessie. I've got a list, and I've checked it twice. I'm here to decide if you've been naughty or nice. You can scream and beg for your life, but naughty girls get the axe, and nice girls get the knife." This scared Tessie to the core, and as much as she was scared, she noticed the pointed coat hanger thrown next to her. She gathered the courage, grabbed it by her hand, and shoved it into the crazy man's chest. The man began to writhe in pain as he howled loudly and fell next to Tessie. His huge hand was on Tessie as he almost went unconscious. Tessie moved his hand and ran away, screaming and in tears. It was after midnight when Tessie's mother returned home. She saw the front door hacked into pieces and rushed inside the house to look for her daughter. Gazing around at the carnage, her eyes struggled to take it all in. Then she began screaming in absolute horror as she saw the man dressed as Santa Claus lying almost dead on the floor in a pool of blood. She then looked for Tessie, who was sitting numb by the corner of the room with the blood-stained coat hanger. She couldn't believe her eyes, that her 11-year-old daughter had killed Santa Claus on Christmas Eve.
There was a small celebration we hosted for our friends and family. After all the guests at the party had left, I watched my little sister Anna as she opened her last birthday present.
Anna, who's it from? I don't know, there's no name card. It's just written to Anna in a dark red color.
Inside was the most beautiful porcelain doll I'd ever seen. Her perfect milky skin was as white as snow, and her rosy cheeks complemented her big blue eyes. Her hair was nice and pretty. Her clothes were woven from pure silk and shined.
Ah, she's beautiful.
It's a shame you don't know who gave it to you, I said, observing the name tag.
What will you name her?
Mom asked.
Josephine.
Josephine turned out to be Anna's favorite birthday present. It seemed that Anna never played with any of her other presents or toys. Sometimes it seemed like Anna was obsessed with the doll. Whenever it was dinner time, Anna never wanted to eat. She'd stay locked in her room with Josephine. Anna refused to go to Mass on Sundays. I found Anna's rosary and cross outside her door on a lampstand, and that scared me a lot. One morning, I woke up at 3 a.m. I was thirsty, so I crept to the kitchen to get some water. I passed Anna's room, and I saw the light shining through under the door and the keyhole. I put my ear against her door and listened.
Josephine, your hair is so pretty.
I heard Anna say in a very high-pitched voice,
Mom says I should quit playing with you.
And Jim says you're controlling me.
Anna sounded extremely sick and even slightly demonic. I peeked through the keyhole and almost had a heart attack. Staring back at me were Anna's blue eyes. But wait, Anna had brown eyes. I stumbled backwards and pushed against the wall violently.
Josephine, what are you looking at?
Anna said in a voice that sounded like a million spirits. Horrified, I ran to my room and locked the door. Over the next couple of days, Anna acted very strangely. She looked very pale and sick. Mom called in for a doctor. The doctor came over and checked Anna and asked us to get a few reports done for Anna. When the reports came, they turned out to be completely normal, and the doctor said she was fit and fine. But Anna's situation was deteriorating. She never made eye contact with anyone. All she did was stare at the wall. She never did anything else. It was so creepy. Josephine had disappeared. Mom and I couldn't find her anywhere. One day, a friend of Mom came to visit us. My mom told her about Anna's condition, and by the looks of all of it, she suggested my mom to show Anna to a priest. She could sense something evilly suspicious in Anna. A day or two later, a priest came over to deliver the demon from Anna. He laid a cross on her chest, and Anna immediately screamed out. Her scream was like a demonic screech, 1,000 nails against a chalkboard. She was sweating, and her straps looked like they were going to break. Only the whites of her eyes showed, and you could see the veins popping out of her forehead. The priest started saying multiple blessings. By the power of the Lord, I deliver this demon from this child. I gripped my mom for support. Anna screamed louder. All of a sudden, the lights began to flicker rapidly, and it seemed like dark shadows were bouncing against the walls. 1,000 voices started humming around in the room, and I swear I felt as if Josephine was sitting in the corner of the room, but when I looked, there was nothing. Suddenly, everything stopped. The electricity went out, and the voices stopped. Anna was breathing loudly, and the priest was saying a short prayer of thanks. Then he turned to us. Let Anna rest for a couple of days. Then she'll be fine. Keep her in her room, but do not talk to her. Then the priest set a book of prayers at Anna's bedside. He smiled at me, as if asking me not to worry, and then left. Anna lay there with her eyes closed. Mom pulled me out of the room. That night, I crept to Anna's room. It was locked. A dim light shone from under the door. I crept closer. That's when I heard it. Chants upon chants were coming from her room. Anna sounded like an evil spirit wafting against walls. What was she chanting? It sounded like a different language. Oh no! Anna was chanting our family prayer backwards. Completely astounded, I looked through the keyhole and saw Anna dancing around candles and a burning fire in the center. She was burning the prayer book, which the priest had kept on her bedside. A twisted, wicked face shone upon my little sister. All along the walls were horrifying writings and symbols, such as 666, and it looked like they were all written in blood. In my own fear, I passed out. Mom woke me up around 7 in the morning and asked me worriedly,
Jim, what happened to you? Why are you lying outside Anna's room?
Flashes of all that had happened the previous night came flooding to my mind, and I stood there in front of Mom, speechless. Mom shook me hard and asked,
What's wrong?
I fumbled as I said, Anna. Mom rushed to Anna's room and opened the door. There was nobody in sight. I told my mom all that I saw. She immediately called up the police, and they reached in a few minutes. The search was on. Mom also called the priest to come and check. The burning of the prayer book and the weird numbers written on the wall, but he couldn't figure out what had happened. After that night, Anna was never to be seen again. But somehow, I knew that Josephine had something to do with it. Years later, I had a family of my own. My daughter, Sydney, opened her last present on her 8th birthday. Who's it from, I asked.
It doesn't say.
Inside was the most beautiful porcelain doll I had once seen. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon for more videos.
Cecilia and Linda were two typical American teenage girls. After school, they spent all of their time together, watching scary movies, having sleepovers, shopping for new clothes, etc. They liked partying, keeping up with their friends, having fun, and enjoying life. They had no way of knowing the horrible fate that life had in store for them. It was Christmas season, and Cecilia and Linda were planning to celebrate it together. They decided to have a girls' night out on Christmas Eve. They planned to sneak out to a nightclub for a Christmas party as soon as their parents went to sleep. On the night of Christmas, Cecilia kissed her parents goodnight and went upstairs to bed. When she thought that everyone had gone to sleep, she took out her cell phone, called her friend Linda, and told her to meet her at the store down the street. Linda agreed and hung up. Cecilia quietly opened her bedroom window, trying not to wake anyone. She stepped out onto the windowsill and climbed down the drain pipe. As soon as she walked down the deserted street, she got a strange feeling that she was being watched. The hair on the back of her neck pricked up. She glanced behind her, but she was all alone. When she came to the corner store, there was nobody around, so she took out her cell phone and called Linda. "Okay, I'm at the store. Hurry up, or I am going home." "What's wrong?" Linda asked. "I don't know. This just doesn't feel like other nights. Something isn't feeling right. I've got a bad vibe." "Stop it, you're just paranoid," laughed Linda. "I will be there in 2 minutes." Cecilia hung up the phone, but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching her. 5 minutes later, Linda turned up and the two girls walked together to the nightclub. The girls were too young to get into the club, but the bouncers never asked them for ID. They strolled inside, and pretty soon, they were dancing to the music and flirting with guys on the dance floor. Around 3 a.m., Cecilia was chatting with a really cute guy who must have been at least 10 years older than her. Suddenly, she felt her phone vibrating in her pocket. It was a text message from her ex-boyfriend, Joey. She hadn't heard from him since they had broken up a month ago. The text read, "Come outside. I've got a surprise for you." Curious, she looked around and saw Linda busy, talking to some other man. So, without saying goodbye, Cecilia walked out the door of the nightclub. She had just taken a few steps when she received another message. It read, "Meet you around the corner, over by the dumpster." The street was dimly lit and deserted. Cecilia had a bad feeling in the pit of her stomach. Something didn't feel right, but she told herself she was just being overcautious. Inside the nightclub, Linda was looking for her friend. After waiting for close to 15 minutes, she began to grow impatient. She scanned the dance floor, but there was no sign of Cecilia. She even checked the toilets, but they were empty. At 3:27 a.m., a relieved Linda got a text from Cecilia. It read, "Meet me outside now. Hurry." When Linda got outside, she received another text. "I'm around the corner, by the dumpster. Come watch me sparkle." Linda followed the direction, crossing the dark, lonely street. When she rounded the corner, she was confronted by a horrific sight. Her heart almost froze in her chest. Cecilia was hanging upside down from a streetlight in the parking lot behind the dumpster. Sparkling Christmas tree lights were wrapped around her ankles. There was a large pool of blood below her. She had deep wounds along her stomach and neck. Linda fell to the ground on her knees and began screaming hysterically. Some people who were standing at the door of the nightclub heard her cries and came rushing over. When they turned the corner and saw Cecilia's blood-dripping corpse hanging in front of them, they were horrified. The cops were called and they questioned Linda for hours. Still in a state of shock, she could barely talk. Sobbing uncontrollably, she told them about how she and Cecilia had snuck out for the night and had gone to the nightclub together. She tried to remember all the guys they talked and flirted with on the dance floor at the party. They asked her if she knew anyone who would want to harm Cecilia, but she couldn't think of anyone. As much as she wanted to catch Cecilia's killer, she was no help to the investigation. During the interrogation, one of the cops produced a plastic bag and took out a blood-stained envelope. "We found this lodged in your friend's throat. It's addressed to you." Linda was scalded across the front. With trembling hands, she took out the piece of paper inside and read it. The letter read, "Maybe if you stayed in bed like you were supposed to, things like this wouldn't happen. Don't go sneaking around at night. Bad things can happen." The cops had to grab her before she fainted. An ambulance took Linda to the hospital and she was treated for shock. When Linda returned home the next day, she was still shaken. Her parents told her that Cecilia's ex-boyfriend, Joey, had been arrested for the murder. He was later released after a lie detector test. He claimed that his phone had been stolen the day of the murder. The police didn't rule him out as a suspect in the case, but they had enough evidence to charge him. As fate would have it, Cecilia's murder had remained unsolved. Nobody was ever brought to trial for the crime, and as time went on, people began to forget about it. 2 years had passed, and Linda had almost managed to forget about the terrible night when her best friend was savagely murdered. One night, she called her boyfriend and asked him to meet her at the park. It was about 2 a.m. She began to walk to the park, but felt a strange presence. Just like the one Cecilia had told her about the night she was murdered. She was almost at the park when the feeling came across her, so she let it go. Her phone beeped. It was a text message from her boyfriend. "Almost there, baby. Love you lots." It made her feel much better. Her last task was to pass by the store. The park was on the other side. She began to walk, but heard something behind her. Immediately, she began to run. Her boyfriend got to the park and waited for about 15 minutes. At 2:35 a.m., he got a text message from Linda. It read, "Keep walking forward and you'll see me." He did as the text suggested and walked forward there. Hanging upside down was the blood-drenched body of Linda. Christmas tree lights were wrapped around her ankles. He called the cops and was interrogated all night. The next day when Linda's boyfriend got home, there was a letter waiting for him at the doorstep. It was stained with small drops of blood. The note read, "Don't go sneaking around at night. Bad things can happen." I wish I could tell you that the murders of Linda and Cecilia were solved, but that's just not the case. Today, the police say that the investigation is still going on, but they have no new leads. The murders are seldom spoken about nowadays. They were high-profile cases at the time. Due to the strange lack of evidence, people soon forgot about them. Everyone who was involved went on with their lives. You may be wondering, how do I know so much about these cases? Well, I would rather not go into it, considering it is still an ongoing investigation. If you must know, I was the cop who was assigned to the case. I was the cop who handed Linda the blood-stained letter. You may also be wondering why the murders were never solved. Well, like I always say, don't go sneaking around at night. Bad things can happen.
When I couldn't find Mrs. Smith in the queue of pensioners for the third consecutive month, I sighed in disappointment. The youthful, 65-year-old brightened the somber atmosphere of the bank every time she entered. She spoke to everyone, including Dominic, the senior manager at the branch, asking us about our families, the traffic in the city, or the mundane weather in a manner that seldom lacked enthusiasm. But I was her favorite. She treated me like her son and frequently brought homemade food for me. Often she pulled up a chair beside me, sometimes discussing petty issues, or sometimes silently observing me work. For the last 3 months, her son Sam collected her pension. He brought the relevant documents with Mrs. Smith's thumbprints. Unlike his gregarious mother, Sam never spoke more than what was necessary. He responded in monosyllables. If a lengthier conversation became inevitable, he preferred telling Dominic. In fact, Dominic only conveyed that Mrs. Smith had fallen ill, and the doctor had advised her bed rest. I winced. She had finally succumbed to old age. One evening, while tallying the bank data, I found that a fixed deposit belonging to Mrs. Smith was to mature in a few days. I thought of calling her to remind her of it, and to inquire about her health. After a few rings, Sam answered, "Good evening. Can I talk to Mrs. Smith?" I tried to sound as courteous as possible. "Who's this?" "This is Andrew Dale from Bank of Chicago." "She's sleeping." And before I could say anything more, the line went dead. It was 6 in the evening. I imagined the once ebullient old lady now lying on the bed and suffering. I made a mental note to call her the next day. The next morning, when I woke up, it was past 9. I leaped out of bed. Even though it was a Sunday, we had plenty of household chores to attend. Dominic and I had to buy fresh vegetables and fish, as our refrigerator was filled with only stale leftovers. An ever-growing pile of laundry lay on the sofa. I went to check if he was up in his room, but he was still sleeping. Dominic and I had been roommates for quite some time now, and soon, because of our common interests and hobbies, we turned out to be pretty good friends. We had joined at the same position at the bank, until recently Dominic bagged a promotion. However, that didn't change anything between us. We were still great friends. I prepared our usual omelette and coffee for breakfast. Dominic loved coffee. Mrs. Smith had once gifted him a coffee mug. Mrs. Smith. I remembered I had to give her a call. She must be up by now. I took out my phone to call her. Nobody answered. Undeterred, I tried again. This time, Sam's voice came over. "Yes?" He sounded irritated. Hello, this is Andrew from Bank of Chicago. Mrs. Smith's term deposit is maturing and, let's discuss that in the branch, shall we?" He snapped. Sure. What? A lump formed in my throat. Can I speak to her? I still asked. Sam took a deep breath. No, she's sleeping. He disconnected the call. I stared at the phone until the screen darkened. Whom are you calling? Why do you look tense? Dominic came out of his room. Mrs. Smith. Who's she? Ah, your favorite aunt. So what did she say? She's sleeping. At least that's what her son said. I hope you didn't ask him to wake her, he said with a grin as he gulped down the cup of coffee that I'd kept for him on the dining table. Too much sugar, Andrew. Cut down on it. I ignored his jibe. She wakes up early. You know her sleep schedules as well? Impressive. But she's ill now, so I should consider concentrating more on work at office, he said jokingly. I grimaced. I wasn't in any mood for silly arguments. My mind remained glued to Mrs. Smith. Was Sam deliberately avoiding me? But why? I paced around the house. I drank 3 cups of coffee. I switched on the television and changed the channels one after the other. At around 10, I called Mrs. Smith once more, having decided not to budge without speaking to her. But her phone was turned off. Don't you think we should check on her? I asked Dominic, his eyes focused on a set of files lying on the table in front of him. Whom? He asked without raising his head from his files. Mrs. Smith. I made the exasperation evident in my voice. What's wrong with you? Her son is there to look after her. Why are you so bothered? I'd never seen Dominic so angry. My face reddened. I glared at him and marched out of the house. The meteorological department had predicted rains for the next few days. Nothing like cookies and tea on a rainy day. I remembered Mrs. Smith say as she handed me a stainless steel box full of fritters a few months back. You'll fatten me up, I said as I greedily took a bite of the crispy fritters. Huh? You are young. You should eat without worrying. I missed her. I still had the box, and 5 more of her boxes. I always forgot to return them. She never asked me to get them either. I had to pay a visit to Mrs. Smith. I had been to Mrs. Smith's house a year back for Christmas. The 5-story building had worsened in its condition ever since. I closed my umbrella and jumped over the accumulated water in front of the building entrance to enter the dimly lit lobby. A suffocating damp odor was omnipresent. I reached for Mrs. Smith's name on the wooden letter boxes attached on the left wall of the lobby. 201. I smiled and took an elevator to the 2nd floor. A young woman in a white uniform answered the door. I assumed her to be Mrs. Smith's nurse. When I asked her about Mrs. Smith, after introducing myself, she asked me to wait in the living room. The living room was small. It had a cane sofa set and an old-fashioned television. A photograph of a young Mrs. Smith along with her husband and a child was hung on the wall. The house had 2 more rooms, kitchen and a bathroom. The rooms were shut. Mrs. Smith must be in one of these. I sat on the sofa and stared at the ceiling fan that continuously made a loud rattling sound as I waited for the nurse to return with Sam. The minutes passed. My stomach was rumbling with hunger. Dominic had planned to order pizzas for lunch. I messaged him, I shall be late. The sky had turned into a deep shade of gray. I didn't want to get stuck in the rains and the resulting traffic jam. Impatiently, I got up and knocked the door of one room. Mrs. Smith? No reply. I knocked again. Still, no reply. I slowly turned the doorknob. The door opened with a creaking sound that reverberated across the room. I tiptoed into the dark room. The curtains were drawn tightly. Someone was sleeping. It must be Mrs. Smith. I thought of leaving without disturbing her, but I was overpowered by the desire to talk to her once. I inched closer to the bed and called out her name. She didn't reply. I touched the blanket covering her. Each and every follicle of hair rose on my body. I pulled the blanket forcefully. The rain hammered against the window panes. A flash of lightning illuminated the room as I stared at the bed. There was no Mrs. Smith, only a line of pillows. I shuddered. It increasingly dawned upon me that something very wrong was happening in the house. Sam and the nurse had not yet returned. I moved towards the other room. As I walked closer to that room, I heard a persistent buzzing sound. Curiosity got the better of me, and I pushed open the door. To my amazement, two massive refrigerators stood next to each other. They continuously made the buzzing sound in the otherwise quiet house. I couldn't recall having seen those refrigerators earlier. Where was Mrs. Smith? And what are these fridges for? I went to the first fridge and held its large metal handle. I shivered at its icy cold touch. My heart thumped loudly. I checked behind me. Still nobody. I pulled the door open. I gasped. It was empty. I felt like a burglar, but I couldn't resist the urge to check the other fridge. Praying to God, I opened it. Cold air hit my face. A loud thunder covered my shriek as I fell back on the floor. The pale, yellow body of Mrs. Smith stared at me from inside the fridge. She looked grotesque. Someone seemed to have forced her body into the fridge, making it bend. Her eyes were wide open. My head was spinning. I covered my mouth to stop myself from vomiting. I somehow pulled myself and shut the fridge. I ran out through the door, but something stopped me. Something was weird about the body. Something different. I came back and opened the fridge again. I raised her lifeless and stiff arm. The thumb had a blue ink stain. I heard footsteps. Someone was coming up the stairs. I hurried for the door. The elevator was on the 4th floor. I banged my hands over the elevator button. 4. The steps became louder. 3. I saw the shadow of the person. 2. I dived into the elevator, quickly hit the button to shut the doors. I slouched on the floor. My shirt was soaked in sweat. It was raining heavily when I came out of the building. I frantically waved at taxis. After 10 minutes, I got one after agreeing to an exorbitantly high fare. As I got in, I thought I had to do something. Sam was trying to keep the pension money flowing in for himself even after his mother was dead. Wait, what if he had killed her for money? I had to figure this out. I must involve Dominic, I thought. I was groggy when I got out of the taxi and almost collapsed while ringing the doorbell. Dominic dragged me inside her house. Dominic, Mrs. Smith, she's dead. I went to her house and... Relax, he said, putting his arm on my shoulders. I sighed. I was relieved to be at home. Have some water, he said. He brought me a bottle of cold water from the refrigerator. I drank the water. I never realized I was so thirsty. Thanks, I said as I slumped over. He shrugged his shoulders. You would be afraid to open fridges now. He sat facing me. I stared at him through the glass bottle. You would be afraid to open fridges now? I never told him where I found Mrs. Smith's body. I hope you're feeling better, Dominic said. The bottle shook in my hand. He smiled.
It was a cold and dark, mysterious night. The moon was struggling to escape from the ruthless grip of the strange dark clouds. Dogs were howling somewhere, and the wind kissed the Bayonne tree leaves. Rachel was repeatedly switching between the news and sports channel on TV. Suddenly, her eyes caught something interesting.
Breaking news. A psychotic killer from Newland Jail has escaped and is on a rampage. The assailant has killed 2 women who were alone in their homes. We are now getting reports that one of them was from Revolt Street.
Rachel was terrified. Revolt Street is where she lived. And she was all the more scared out of her wits when she realized she was all alone in the house. And to top that, owls were hooting from nearby trees and lights were flickering on the darkened street. Suddenly, Rachel heard a cold knock at the door. She felt her blood freeze in her veins. She slowly walked towards the door. Her legs were trembling. She opened the door. A pale man in his 40s was outside her door. His eyes were blood red. Rachel's heart skipped a beat when she noticed those eyes. The man asked her whether this was Sarah's house. Rachel nodded. The man's face lit up. "Hello, madam. I am Webster, Sarah's pal," he said in a harsh, husky voice. "My car broke down. Can I stay in your house for a while till the mechanic arrives?" Rachel was already terrified seeing those eyes and objected bluntly. But the man was repeatedly pestering her to let him in. Finally, he asked if he could speak to Sarah. Rachel shook her head and said, "Sarah is very ill. She is sleeping upstairs. I can't wake her up. Please leave." But the man was so stubborn that Rachel thought of a plan. She told the man to wait at the door for a while and ran upstairs. She took a deep breath and then adjusted her voice and mimicked like she was very ill. "Webster, I'm not feeling well. I need to rest. We will meet tomorrow." Yelling loudly so that Webster could hear it. After some time, she trotted downstairs and opened the door cautiously. She found those cold, blood-red eyes staring at her. "Webster, I'm sorry," Rachel said in a feeble voice, avoiding those eerie eyes, and closed the door at once. Rachel tried to calm herself. She tried to watch something interesting on TV. She was startled when she heard a knock again. Thinking it was Webster, she didn't respond. She kept quiet, but the knock at the door was becoming louder and persistent. Finally, Rachel gathered the courage to answer the door. The moment she opened the door, a cold, icy hand gripped her. She was frozen with fear. It was an old man with a crooked smile on his face and a tattered bag over his shoulder. Webster was still standing impatiently beside him. He hadn't left yet. "Oh, my child, can you get me a glass of water?" whispered the old man. Rachel hesitated. The old man murmured again, "Come on, child, I need to quench my thirst." Rachel closed the door and scampered to the kitchen to get water. The news was still flashing on the television. She slowly let her hand out of the door with a glass of water. The icy fingers took it. Suddenly, the power went off. Only the howling of dogs was to be heard. Then there was dead silence. And after that, a mysterious and evil psychotic laughter was heard. The old man and Webster found that Rachel was gone with the door ajar when the power resumed. Webster called out for Rachel. She wasn't there. Both the men stepped inside the house calling for Rachel. The television was still flashing with the breaking news. They went towards the kitchen in search of her. At that moment, the power went off again. A cold hand crept over Webster's neck. He was petrified and started to yell. They couldn't see anything in the dark, not even each other. Webster could feel the hand crushing his windpipe as he was breathing hard, fighting for his life. Fortunately, the power resumed. To their surprise, nobody was there. The old man looked terrified and had no clue what was going on. They trotted upstairs in fear, thinking that Sarah could help them. The staircase creaked under their feet. The upstairs was dark. They couldn't find the switch to turn on the lights. Somehow they found Sarah's bedroom. Webster knocked on the door, but there was no response. Their hearts were thumping hard when they slowly opened the door. The room was dimly lit by the faint moonlight. "Sarah? Sarah?" called out Webster, hoping that she would answer. Suddenly, something cold touched Webster's feet. He jumped back like a cat on fire. The old man took a flashlight from his bag. It was blood, pure blood. Sarah was lying dead in the pool of blood oozing from her slit-open throat. Suddenly, a psychotic laughter was heard from behind. It was a gloomy figure in the dark with a blood-dripping knife in its hands. The eerie figure approached them. The old man shone the flashlight towards the figure's face. The faces of the two men had the expression of cold death. The figure was none other than Rachel. After a long silence, two loud screams were heard.
It's late night. Not too late, but quite late to sleep. But I want to watch TV all night because I rarely get this chance to stay up all night. My parents were out and I was home alone. My mom and dad had left for some important function, and I was not invited. So they gave me a mobile phone and asked me to watch TV with a table full of my favorite snacks. You know, it's always an awesome feeling to be home alone when your parents are away. We can do what we want. We're free as a bird. No one can stop us from doing anything. It was around 10 p.m. I was watching a horror movie on TV named The Haunted House. I'd been waiting to watch this movie since a long time. That too at night, and this was the chance. So I was totally leaned to that movie. I didn't even notice I got a call from my mom. I realized it when I saw the phone during the break halfway through the movie. I called the mom and told her everything was okay. She said that they would take some time to get back home, as there were many influential people at the party which were of business-related interest to my dad. I said okay and hung up. I started chatting with my friends and told them about how interesting the movie was so far, and they should watch it too. Suddenly, I heard something fall in my kitchen. I turned behind and found nothing. I consoled myself, saying it may be just a rat. I just gave a look at the window that was to the side of the door to my left. To my horror, I saw a man holding a knife and staring at me with his red eyes. Chills ran down my spine, and I froze. I didn't look around and immediately hid under my sofa. I didn't know what to do. I peeped through the small hole of the sofa, and my blood froze as the man was still standing, this time with a creepy smile on his face. I hadn't seen such a smile ever. It was scarier than any horror movie. I gulped and looked at my phone that I was holding in my hand. I took a long breath and called the cops. The call kept ringing. I was praying to God that someone answers the call. My heart pumped 100 times faster as no one answered. I called again. Please, God, one call. I prayed for the millionth time. Hello? Somebody answered my call, and that is when I felt like I was reborn from the dead. Hello? They said again as I didn't give a quick reply. Hello? Hello? Please help me. I pleaded with them. What happened, sir? There's someone outside my door holding a knife in his hand. Please help me. Sir, give me a second. I'm tracking your location. Please be patient. I was waiting on the call, and I peeped the second time, and my heart came to a normal beat when I didn't see the man this time. Sir, the police are arriving in 10 minutes. Please be on the line with me until they arrive. The lady spoke, giving me some courage to breathe. I was breathing as hard as I could, and I shivered. Sir, are you okay? I can hear some heavy breathing. Yeah, I'm fine. I heard the police sirens, and there were knocks on my door with a lady's voice asking, "Anybody there?" Happy tears dwelled in my eyes, and I ran to the door and unlocked it. I immediately felt relieved seeing the policewoman who was in front of me. She consoled me by rubbing my back, saying, "That's okay, we're here. Nothing to worry, child." The cops came in and started to investigate in the house. The lady police officer was with me, while the other policemen were wandering around the house searching. After a few minutes, the police made me show them my house, and I was totally shocked at what I saw. I almost died of a heart attack. The house had muddy footprints starting from the storeroom, continuing to the kitchen, and ended just behind my sofa where I'd been sitting, watching TV. I couldn't understand anything. I hadn't observed the house after my parents had left, unless for watching TV, which was still switched on playing the movie. Then they made me sit, and the lady officer asked me, "Hi, I'm Karen. Can I get your name?" "I'm George." "So I'm going to interrogate you, and you need to answer me correctly." I nodded my head. "So how did you see the intruder and where?" "I was watching TV when suddenly I heard some noise in the kitchen, but when I turned behind I found nothing. After a few seconds, I gave a look at my nearest side window and was shocked to see a man outside the window, holding a knife in his hand. He was grinning at me, and that look on his face was scary." "Okay, so what you have said is exactly matching to our expectations. But there is a slight difference in your story that may shock you." "What? What difference?" "The man, or the intruder who you saw through the window, was not outside the window, but inside the window. In fact, inside the house." I was stunned. My eyes widened, and my heart almost skipped a beat. "What are you saying?" "Yes, George. Let me show you an example," she said as she called a police officer and made him stand on the last footprint that was behind the sofa. I was made to sit in the exact position that I was in while I was watching TV. I looked at the window and was terrified to see that his reflection was like he was outside the window, whereas actually he was inside. I turned towards Officer Karen. She smiled at me and asked, looking like he was outside. I nodded my head and asked, I realized he was inside, behind me, but how did he break into the house? He broke your storeroom, which was really weak. But why didn't he hurt me? That is what we're thinking, but by God's grace, you're safe now. You were brave to call us at the right time. We will inform your parents about this. You can rest for some time. We'll be here until your parents arrive, she said as she was searching for something in her pocket. Maybe a phone to call my parents. I sat down on the sofa, blankly looking at the window, wondering why that intruder hadn't killed me. And why was he here? To rob the house? To kidnap me? Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon for more videos.